Scientific notation. You've probably, in theory, seen it in either a math or a science class before. I'm going to assume you've forgotten it. So during this course, we're going to use models, often mathematical models, to help us understand a particular set of phenomena, to help us figure something out and predict what's going to happen. I should point out, these models will almost always be wrong. Almost everything that I teach you this year, screen's frozen, so that's what you're going to say, right? Just do that. Thank you. I always forget to do that. We're going to be using models. They're going to be wrong. Almost everything that I teach you this year is technically going to be a lie. The reason is there's always a deeper dive that you can do. So we'll ignore friction quite often, or when we look at free fall, we'll ignore air resistance, or we'll just say, hey, let's assume that whatever we're dropping is shaped like a cannonball and is really dense, so that air resistance doesn't play a big part as long as we're not, going 10 times the speed of sound. Almost everything that I teach you is going to be technically wrong, but it's going to be pretty good. Our models will be pretty good. They'll be good approximations. Since our models will be mathematical, good math skills are helpful, although I also think that physics helps you become much better at math. So if you're someone who, I struggle with math, I'm going to say to you, take heart, you'll get better because of this course. Certainly in areas of equation solving and being able to see how things fit together, you will get better. One skill is being able to use scientific notation. So what are the rules for scientific notation? The rule is, for a number correctly written in scientific notation, there can be only one digit to the left of the decimal. So 12.3 times 10 to the fourth is or is not in scientific notation. It's not. How would you write that in scientific notation? 1.23 times 10 to the okay, so
my apologies, Mr. Bailey. Can you contact the office, please, Mr.
Okay,
Bailey?
that's going to go on YouTube as well because I didn't get a chance to pause it. Anyways, this part is usually pretty easy. The power of 10. Well, here's what we would be saying. By moving the decimal over one to the left, we've added an extra power of 10. This would be 1.23 times 10 to the fifth. Compare that if I had given you 0.36 times 10 to the 2, you would write that as 3.6 times 10 to the... It's either 3 or 1, so... Yeah, to the 1, because this time you're moving the decimal that way, smaller. Okay. You'll rarely get a number that's in sort of a wrong version of scientific notation. Usually you'll get a number in standard form. So what you really do is you count the number of places the decimal moves. If the decimal point moves to the left, the power of 10 will be positive. If the decimal point moves to the right, the power of 10 will be negative. And it's very important that you learn how your calculator specifically displays numbers in scientific notation and requires you to enter numbers in scientific notation. And so I'm going to be wandering around a lot today to show you how it works. So next page over, it says, rewrite the following in scientific notation. The Earth weighs that much, which it does. Mr. Dewick, how do we know how much the Earth weighs? It's not like we can stick it on a scale. How do we know? We'll calculate it in Physics 12. But for now, what will I do? Well, the decimal goes after the first non-zero number. So 5.98 times 10 to the... I find for stuff like this, something this big, I might be tempted to actually draw with my pencil and count. 1, 2, I'm going to make you do the same thing. So nice try. 5.98 times 10 to the, I'll give you a hint, it's 20 something. Is it 24? Yeah. Now, the other way you could have done is you could have gone 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 22, 23, 24. I don't care which method you use. I just care that you're able to do something. And then the units, kilograms. Is that heavy, Mr. Dewick? Insofar as astronomical objects go, it's kind of meh. It's about middle of the road. Sun is far, 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 far heavier. Jupiter, Saturn, bigger mass. 1 proton has a charge of that many. Yes? It's actually made up technically out of mostly plasma, which is the fourth type of matter that we talk about solid, liquid, and gas. There's a fourth type of matter called plasma. Actually, there's more than that, but plasma is stars. That would be atoms where the electrons have been ripped right off. So it's really just a bunch of nucleuses floating around and a bunch of electrons floating around but not connected. Okay? If you're looking for a dumb way to remember it, the sun is a miasma of plasma. There you go. 1 proton has a charge of that many coulombs. Now we're writing a really small number. How do we write a really small number? Again, in the same way with the big number, we start on the left and write our first non-zero number. We're going to do the same thing here. So the first non-zero number is the 1, and then 0.6 times 10 to the, and again we're going to count. Now please notice I put the decimal between the 1 and the 6, so I'm going to count until I get to there. Oh, and what's my exponent going to be? That's my way of picking on you because it didn't look like you were counting at all. You're almost right. Is it 19? It's not 20. No, it's okay. It's going to be negative 19 because it's a number that's smaller than 1. It's not negative 19 as though it's a negative number. It's negative exponent means we're dividing. Somebody at the door. Come in. It's open. It's open. Let me just pause the video here for a second for those of you watching on YouTube. Pause. Remember, with exponents, is a negative exponent does not mean below 0. It means divide. It's the same as dividing by 10 to the positive 19. That's why this works. You're not often going to have terms that big and that small. Usually, in fact, you're going to be given stuff in scientific notation. I would never write this out. I would never write this out. I know that the mass of the Earth is 5.98 times 10 to the 24th. I know that the charge on a coulomb is positive 1.6 times 10 to the negative 19 coulomb. That's charge on a proton. By the way, the charge on an electron is negative 1.6 times 10 to the negative 19 coulombs because that's how protons and electrons work. The temperature of the sun is 15 million degrees Kelvin. What? Well, 15 million. How many zeros is million? Okay. 6 is correct. 9 is not correct. Or maybe you were just a German saying no. 9. I speak German, so I can make that joke. If they give me a number written out in, can I say in English, like written out with words, I almost always first translate it into what we call standard form, which is non-scientific notation, and then I would write it in scientific notation. What times 10 to the what? 1.5 times 10 to the. Yeah, sloppy mistake. A lot of kids would say, well, million is 6 zeros, so it's times 10 to the 6. But there's a 15. There's an extra little power of 10 from the 15. And then it's degrees K, or K degrees. By the way, that is the temperature of the sun, sort of. The temperature of the sun varies depending on whether you're on the inside, whether you're on the corona, on the outside. The sun is really complicated, but cool. Yeah. Oh, coulombs. Sorry, I didn't put units, capital C. I will, on any test or quiz, I will always take a half mark off if you forget units on your final answer. I won't make you write them during your calculations because I'm lazy but organized. But final answer, always units. In fact, you're going to hear me later on this week, maybe next week, go on a unit rant. You'll see why I don't like Verizon. You also need to be able to take a number in scientific notation and unscientific notation it. Rewrite it in what we call standard form. So 5.4 times 10 to negative 7, the fact that it's a negative 7, this number is going to be a decimal less than 1. 0 point. Ethan, 10 to the negative what? 10 to the negative what? 7. So the most common mistake is kids think that means 7 zeros. It means 7 spots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 5 is the 7th spot. And then the 4 gets tacked on. And then units, meters. If we were in engineering, we would probably write this as 540 nanometers. So if you go into engineering, you'll find you don't use scientific notation. You use milli, micro, nano, all those metric prefixes, but you only use the ones that go up by powers of 3, which is why when I taught you them the other day, I said, nobody uses deca. In fact, almost no one uses centi in engineering. So going bigger, you go to kilo right away, you go to mega, you go to giga, you use those prefixes going up by powers of, by exponents of 3, going up by 1,000 each time. Rewriting this in standard form, so again, it's going to be 4. 10 to the what? That means 3 spots, not 3 zeros. So the 2 takes the first spot, the 3 takes the second spot, and now I need to add 1 0 for 3. How many of you have seen scientific notation before? Okay. Where do you do it? Is it done in math or in science? Math what? I'm not familiar with the new math curriculum. I used to be Math 9, but that was back when I taught Math 9, back in 98. 1998. I know what you're thinking. Sorry? Math 9? Okay. And some of you might not have seen it, but that's scientific notation. What we really need to do now is figure out how we enter this into our calculator. So, if you have a Casio, probably in the bottom row, probably in the middle, you might have a times 10 to the button. That is your scientific notation button. Don't hit it yet. If you have a TI, you have a button that looks like this, EE, and it is probably a shift button, and in your case, George, it's shift comma, look up, it's shift that, second function that right there. In your case, I can also show you where it is because you can't be using the card on the test, you need to know where it is. So my first question is there anybody who can't find their scientific notation button? By the way, here's what it is not. It is not this. All of you have a 10 to the X button. It ain't that. That does something different. That's an anti-log. Oh, what? So I'm going to come around, and your job is to point to what you think is your scientific notation button. That one right there. Yes. Oh, yes. Sorry. Also, some of you will have an EXP, because that's short for exponential scientific notation. So that's your scientific notation button. That's your scientific notation button. Yes. Excellent. Excellent. Not times 10, not the 10 to the power of. Pause. That's not it. It's EE. Shift that. So second function. Clear? You found it on yours?
No.
Shift that.
Oh.
You turn it on. Yes. Move your hand. Yes. EE. Yep. Oh, one more thing. This is not meant to rebuke you. A lot of you have a bad habit. You tap the calculator buttons with your pencil eraser. That wears the ink off the buttons way fast. I would encourage you. Your fingers are far gentler than the pencil eraser. That there? Excellent. There. Yes. There is correct. Yes. Yes. You have the ESC button right there. No, you said it fine. That's correct. Okay. Step 1 is knowing what the button is. Step 2 is knowing how to work it. Now, who was in the little mini lab yesterday? I think that's the first time that I used the phrase lazy but organized. I'm lazy but organized. You might be tempted to do this. Everybody look up. For a number in scientific notation, like 6.23 times 10 to the negative 5, you might be tempted to go 6.23 and then hit your times button and then type a 10 and then hit your exponent button and then go -5. Do not do that. You will get strange errors this year if you do that, because the software does not know that this 10 to the -5 is attached to the 6.23. Instead, to enter 6.23 times 10 to the -5, everybody's going to type along with me. You are going to type 6.23, and then you're going to press your scientific notation button. Notice we did not press times, we did not press 10, we did not press to the power of. That scientific notation button is such a great shortcut. That one button contains the times symbol, the 10, and the to the power of. Now, depending on your calculator brand, the TIs symbolize that with kind of a shrunken capital E. Some of the newer Casios might actually put a little times 10 to the and bump you up as an exponent already. Some of the buttons with the exp might write the word exp, or again, it might put a little E. The next thing, what's the exponent in this? -5. Look up, everybody. Negative is not the subtraction sign. If you hit the subtraction sign when you mean negative, you'll get an error. Good, I was still recording. So negative, you got a negative button. Usually it's either down there, or often it's above or beside the 7. So negative, hit the negative button, hit 5. And then if you want to just store that in your calculator, hit equals. Your calculator will probably leave it in scientific notation, or it might have automatically written it in standard form, and I can show you how you can configure your calculator to display things the way you want later in class, or during Y block. I can show you how you can toggle mandatory scientific notation on and off on your calculator, because you might say, oh, I'm doing a chemistry test and he wants every answer in scientific notation. I'll just set it up so that my calculator always gives me my answers in scientific notation. Or in math, we don't want our answers in scientific notation. I want to be able to toggle that off. So all of you should either have on your screen 6.23 and then whatever symbol your calculator uses for times 10 to the, and then -5, or you might have 0.00004 zeros and then a 6 and a 2 and a 3. Is there anybody that didn't get one of those two options? So you're going to write this here. It says, write down the procedure for entering a number in scientific notation on your calculator below. In order to type 6.23 times 10 to the -5, I type, all of you will hit a 6. All of you will hit a decimal. All of you will hit a 2. All of you will hit a 3. Will you press times? No. Will you type 10? No. Instead, you're going to now put your scientific notation button there. For us on TI land, it's EE. For those of you in Casio land, most of you, it's times 10, and I think it has a little box there. For some of you, it will be the exp button. I think those are the only ones I've seen over the years. And then you'll hit the negative and the 5. Once you've done that, just for giggles, try typing the mass of the Earth, which is going to be 5.98 times 10 to the 24th. If you hit equals, it will just redisplay it because it can't show you that many zeros. But Danveer, depending on how big or how small the number is, if I type, for example, 1.2 times 10 to the negative 1 and store that, my calculator will just automatically decimalize it in standard form because it figures that's an easier number for me to read. And you can configure your calculator usually to what kind of display that you want. Is that all right? All righty. So, performing calculations. Turn the page over, I think. Okay. Lazy but organized. I'm going to give you some advice with calculators. The way we type things into our calculators will be different from the way that we write or type things on paper. When I write or type things on paper, I think using brackets to show multiplication is easier to read. Not on a calculator. On a calculator, I lose track of the brackets. So, are you ready? Prabhner, I'm going to pick on you. This is how my brain would do this. The first question I would ask is this a fraction? And you would say, loud and proud, yes. Is there more than one thing on the top of the fraction? You would say. Is there more than one thing on the bottom of the fraction? You would say. So I'm already deciding I'm going to put a big uber bracket around the top and a big uber bracket around the bottom. But that's all I'm going to do for brackets. So everybody, please don't work ahead. Type along with me. Clear your calculator if you haven't. I would type this as follows. I would go bracket. And in my mind, I say I've just opened up the top. 1.8. Do I need to hit times and 10 to? No, scientific notation button. Max, what's the exponent on the first term? Negative button 3. And this is where I'm going to say to you, look up, everybody look up, everybody look up. Yes, you too. Okay, Owen. Do not do that. If you do that, you've just told the calculator the top ended there. Handwriting, typing, you know it hasn't ended there, but your calculators are stupid. So instead, if I have two brackets side by side like that, I hit times. 2.6. Scientific notation button. Kiana, what's the exponent here? On the 2.6 times 10 to the... Good. Prabhner, have we reached the end of the top? Close off the top. I think I'll show you how you can type it with all brackets next, and you'll see this is way easier to read because I can see that's the top. How do I do a fraction? Well, okay. Who's got the newer Casios? You guys have a fancy schmancy fraction button. Make sure I show you that after this. But for now, those of you that don't have the newer Casios or that have the TIs, divided by, because that's what a fraction line means. Is there more than one thing on the bottom? Yes? Open a bracket. 9. I'm not going to hit times. I'm not going to hit 10 to the scientific notation button 8. Times. And again, if I did this, look up, everybody look up. If I closed off that bracket and open up a new one, my calculator will assume that this next number is on the top, even though I know it's not. My calculator is dumb. So instead of going bracket, bracket, times 1.3, scientific notation, -1. And if you hit enter, you should get either 4 times 10 to the -6, or you might have 0.05 zeros and then a 4, depending on how your calculator is set up to display numbers of that size. If you got an error, pause. Don't clear your... By the way, if you've got an error, don't clear your calculator.
Well,
Oh, you have a question? You didn't get an error?
He did. He got an error.
No, I didn't. I erased it.
Never clear, because usually on the new calculators, when there's an error, if you hit back arrow, the cursor will put you right where it couldn't figure out what you were getting at. It'll just be right where the error occurred. Yes?
Okay, so it says 4 times 10, and then it says to the negative 0.6.
That's fine.
Is that fine?
So your calculator automatically assumes that you want 2 digits up there, and that's because any modern calculator, the biggest times 10 to that you can do is 99 or negative 99. They can't handle 3 digits up there. It just overloads the binary memory buffer.
Okay.
Hashtag nerd trivia. Now, let's suppose perhaps you wanted to actually type it as it's written with brackets. It would look like this. Oh yeah. I'm going to argue that that top one is way easier to read than that bottom one. Bottom one works. I can do it. But I have to do double brackets all over the place. I have to add extra ones that aren't there. I have to track all these brackets. You know what? Big bracket around the top, big bracket around the bottom. However, new Casio, first of all, I'm going to write this. 4 times 10 to the negative 6. I forgot to write the answer. New Casios, you might have a button that looks like this. A fraction button. It's probably near your left, about 3 or 4 buttons down on the left side. I shall come around and show you where that is. Pause the video. Those of you that I said, yes, you have that 2-level fraction button. By the way, it means you also have a 2-level display. What you can do whenever there's a fraction is hit that button first, and you can actually put stuff on the top with your up arrow, and you can put stuff on the bottom with your down arrow. So you can actually tell your calculator where you want stuff to go, which gives you a lot less typing than most of us. You don't need to put brackets around the top because you can tell your calculator that's on the top. You don't need to put brackets around the bottom because you can tell your calculator that's on the bottom. So you're going to hear me all year long say, is this a fraction? Yes. Is there more than one thing on the top? Brackets around the top. Is there more than one thing on the bottom? Brackets around the bottom. Those of you with your fancy schmancy fraction buttons can ignore that. But the rest of us who are still a few years behind in technology, we have to brackets around the top, brackets around the bottom. Someone had a question and I ignored it. Loud and I can't hear you, sorry? Yeah, I haven't got there yet. Patience. I like your enthusiasm. Okay. So, hey, Deegan, let's do this one together. Example 2. Do you have the fancy schmancy fraction button or not? Okay, so you and I will do this the old-fashioned way. Those of you that have the fancy schmancy fraction button, we would say, is this a fraction? Yes, hit the fancy schmancy fraction button. Those of us that do not, so Deegan, is this a fraction? Is there more than one thing on the top? Brackets around the top. Is there more than one thing on the bottom? Brackets around the bottom. I plan my attacks. So I would go like this. I clear my calculator. Bracket. Okay. 5.8. Scientific notation button 3. Am I going to close this bracket off? No. Times 2.67. Scientific notation button 21. No, it's not. On the top. No, I can't imagine you ever doing that. And that's a classic example. I think I already made the joke, I never make mistakes. That's a classic mistake. You know, you'll catch yourself. Are we done on the top, Deegan? Yeah. Close off the top, divided by, open up the bottom. Now, ask me your question. The one that you asked earlier, now it's in context. You said, Mr. Dewick, there's what? Now that there's a 5 outside that bracket, do you need to, you know what? If you use your scientific notation button, you don't. I can actually get away with going negative 9.24, scientific notation button, negative 3, hit my exponent button, 5, and the software will know that that exponent is on this whole thing. If you didn't use your scientific notation button, if you actually typed times 10 to the power of, you would have had to put that number in brackets with the 5 exponent outside the brackets. And this is also my way of asking, do you know where your exponent but you're to the power of? It's not exp. Most modern ones now, it tends to look like that little shift 6 on your keyboard, the carré, because more and more the calculators are using computer notation because they're assuming you're going from computer to calculator to computer. Anybody unable to find their to the power of button? It's okay. Pause the video for a second. You see what I meant by this? Keep going. So, and then times 1.3 scientific notation, -1, close off the bottom. You should get -1.7686, that. If you didn't, don't clear your calculator. Just raise your hand and I'll point out the very subtle typo. Did you get that? Okay, good. First of all, let's write down the answer. Somebody said, Mr. Duke, you have to write the whole thing down. Believe it or not, there's rules, they're called significant figures, for how many digits you write down in your final answer when you multiply, divide, or when you add and subtract. So for what it's worth, the rules for this one would be, you would write -1.8. You would only go to what we call 2 sig figs, 2 significant figures, times 10 to the 36. Somebody asked, Mr. Duick, for number 1, my calculator displayed this as the answer, but for number 2, it displayed it in scientific notation. First of all, how many zeros? How many zeros? 36, 35. Can your calculator display that many? No. So anything that's going to be longer than 8 digits or 9 digits will always be scientific notation. But then if you dive into the settings, you can actually tweak it a little bit. And I can show you that during the Y block. So for decimals, you can say if it's got more than 4 zeros before the first number, write that in scientific, or more than 6 zeros, and same for larger numbers. So it's going to vary from model to model and from your operating system. Or you can also tell your calculator, give me everything in scientific notation. Or if you have a newer calculator, you can actually have it convert this into scientific notation for you. So earlier I said you had to know how to write numbers in scientific notation. I picked these large ones because you can't type them into a calculator. But ones that are less than 7 or 8 digits long, you can actually get the calculator to do it for you. That is scientific notation. What's your homework? There are questions attached to this lesson. I think I also included the answers will be posted online, or you can check with a neighbor. And I also have a lame sheet, and then I have a short little video to show you as well. So hang on.